Hey guys, so I wanted to come on here. This is going to be shown on Tuesday, the what is it going to be? The 27th, June 27th. Of course, trying to get ahead of here because my mom's going to be off by the time you watch this, and we'll be home from my nephew's wedding by then. But still, I want to get you guys some content, so you guys something for something to look forward to, I should say. And at this moment, on June 13th, as I'm recording this for the premiere to premiere, like I said, on June 27th, I'm watching Double Toasted, and they're doing a retro review on Transformers the movie because this past weekend, Rise of the Beast. Again, this is being filmed at a time when Rise of the Beast just came out. By the time you watch this, um, the Flash would have came out already, been 2 weeks in, or something like that, or actually a week in, a little over a weekend, and then Rise of the Beast been a couple of weeks by the time you watch this. But anyway, they're talking about Transformers the movie, and they're talking about one of the moments they talk about in the review in the video is basically how retro the soundtrack is, how 80s heavy metal rock and roll it is, and how basically in the trailer initially, and you can watch the trailer here on YouTube, basically how it was advertised as a rock and roll adventure, and how it reminded them of another movie that came out around that time, or at least a few years prior, um, before Transformers hit the big screen. I think even before Transformers became a series, and it got me thinking, why not show off just a few, and I only have a few. Um, I guess you could say 80s based movies, animated movies that have that theme of rock and roll, 80s rock and roll, early 90s rock and roll to them. Excuse me, to an extent that basically when you look at them, even if they don't have that much rock and roll music in it, if at all, you can definitely tell it has that 80s rock theme, or 80s theme to it that would relate to rock and roll, or basically relate to heavy metal alternative music. So, which are those movies? Well, the first one I want to bring up is basically is the one they were kind of alluding to, that Transformers reminded them of, and that of course the I think this was released in 1981. I believe it was 81. I believe this was released. I can't really recall. I have to look it up. But basically, the first one, the one that they said Transformers reminded them of from the advertisement and everything, was of course heavy metal. Yes, I do have heavy metal on Blu-ray. I don't have it on 4K. I think it's being released, or has been released on 4K. Hopefully I can get that in the future, or maybe somebody can help me out with that. But yeah, this is a heavy metal, and I got this mainly because I watched heavy metal on VHS one time, and I enjoyed it. I really did, and I think I watched it on DVD as well. So I decided, why not why not get the Blu-ray as well to add to the collection, and again, hopefully I can get the 4K as well. I don't got Heavy Metal 2000 yet either, so I still got to look into that. But I did get Heavy Metal, and this was, again, like I said, the one that they said Transformers reminded them a lot of, when it got advertised for theatrical release. Next up, of course, well, we'll get into that in a moment. But next up, we have one that I think came out a year or two before. And what was interesting about this is, I remember looking online, and when I was looking online, I saw people doing these mock-up like trailers, or movie teaser trailers for what they felt a Sonic the Hedgehog Satayam film would have been like, back then, or at least the introduction, the beginning of a Sonic Satayam film. And when I looked at what they would do, and I looked, let me rewind there. Okay. What I'm saying is, when I saw what they were doing, to kind of give you an idea of what they felt an intro would be, that's how I found out about this film. Because I think what they were doing, I don't know if this is around the infancy of a YouTube, or it was peer-to-peer still, or something, but somebody said online, and what we were seeing, in this mock-up like intro to kind of give us an idea of what a Sonic Saturday movie would be like in their minds at that time, somebody mentioned that that intro was from this film, and and when I heard about it, and I read the synopsis, and people were talking very highly about it, I was like, oh, I got to see this film. And that film is Rock and Rule, I should say, Rock and Rule, which has the music of Debbie Harry, Iggy Pop, Cheap Trick, and Lou Reed. So yeah, and Earth, Wind, and Fire. They don't have them advertised on here, but yeah, Earth, Wind, and Fire, Debbie Harry, Iggy Pop, Cheap Trick, easy for me to say, Lou Reed. Let me do that again. Debbie Harry, Iggy Pop, Earth, Wind, and Fire, Cheap Trick, there we go, and Lou Reed. And this got released by Unearthed Entertainment. And like I said, Unearthed Films. And it was done by Nelvana, or whatever, Nelvana, if you will. And it came to theaters. It was in theaters, not just in Canada or anything, but it was also in theaters limitedly in the U.S. But just like, heavy metal and the few ones I'm going to be showing you next, because of its soundtrack and everything, it gained a cult following as being one of the 80s themed alternative music, heavy metal, rock and roll films of all time, from at least the 80s decade, if you will, of all time. So yeah, this definitely is in the same category as, let's say, heavy metal, being a movie of the 80s with 80s music. Then, of course, next up is the one they are reviewing. Of course, that is Transformers. Of course, it's famous for its soundtrack, from Stan Bush to NRG to Spectre General, and I think that's about it. But yeah, and Weird Al Yankovic, believe it or not, Weird Al Yankovic. But yeah, this is another. Now, this is just an additional copy I got. I have two. I have one that I watch, and I have one that, just like my Sat AM box set, I have one that's open, one that's not. So same thing here. But anyway, yeah, this definitely was known not just to for its great animation and the fact it's gone on to be a cult classic within the Transformers and animation community, but mainly for its soundtrack. So that's another one I have. And then another one that kind of falls into that category, doesn't really have much music in it, like songs, but it definitely has that 80s instrumental, alternative instrumental film sound to it, I should say, for its film. Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. It has that 80s alternative instrumental soundtrack to it. And of course, I'm talking about Ralph I think this was Ralph Bakshi that was behind this. I think he may have been behind this film. I'm not really sure. I think he may have been. You guys can correct me on there. But of course, I'm talking about Fire and Ice. And again, even though it didn't have, like I said, a soundtrack, a musical soundtrack of, you hear songs and everything, the alternative instrumental in this, really really made up for that, in my opinion. And again, the animation and all that gives that feel of a rock and roll film, even though it's based in fantasy. Next up, another cult classic, all the way from Japan, but it's one of those films that you could definitely say, all right, it doesn't have an 80s soundtrack to it, but just by its presentation and its cult following, you could definitely feel it's got those 80s vibes of a rock and roll heavy metal like film, even with its instrumental soundtrack and everything. And I'm talking about Akira. That's right, this is the box set version of the 4K release of Akira, right there. So it's the 4K release, in case you guys want to know. But yeah, this is the 4K release of Akira, and this is like one of those anime films, like I mentioned, from back then, that has that feel to it. It really does. So, there's that. And then I think, hold on for a second if I can find it here. I don't know where I hid it. Oh, I hit it all the way down here. That's lovely. Maybe I can get it real carefully. There we go. And then, of course, bring out some other stuff too. But we also have, before I forget, another one that came out in the early 80s. It's an anime, but just like Akira and all that, it has that vibe to it to where the soundtrack and everything gives you sort of that rock and roll feel, alternative music like, film genre to it. And that is, of course, Space Adventure Cobra. You know, so if you watch this, it definitely has that feel of an 80s rock and roll alternative film, even though it's an anime that I think launched the series. And then, of course, around that same time, I don't know if this was 80s or not, we have Metropolis. That's the guy that did his anime version of it. So, yeah, we have Metropolis, you know, Metropolis, I should say Metropolis, not Metropolis, Metropolis. So this also kind of, like I said, just by the animation and the style and all that, kind of has that feel of an 80s anime that the soundtrack kind of makes up for what you don't get song wise, but it definitely has that 80s rock and roll alternative music vibe. And then last but not least, you can't close it out without doing this one. Of course, Ghost in the Shell. This is the 4K version of it and everything. But this also was in around the late 80s, early 90s, mostly 80s. And it definitely has that, like I said, that rock and roll like vibe to it that you are that you associate with it and everything. Even though it doesn't have the music, the soundtrack, the instrumental soundtrack, in my opinion, more than anything makes up for it, and that's all I can really say. But yeah, yeah, that's pretty much about it. But yeah, these are basically, if I can get them up real quick, carefully without dropping them, these here are basically my choice of 80s films that have that rock and roll like vibe to them, with or without music, with or without songs, or with or hold on for a sec. Okay, guys, sorry about that, but like I said, these are just the films that I associate of kind of having like, 80s music, connected to it, like, songs like heavy metal and rock and roll, I should say, and Transformers, and then of course the ones that have like that 80s like 80s rock and roll vibe to it, but mainly the soundtrack is more alternative, instrumental, and everything. So that's just these are just my choices. Maybe you guys know of others that I have not talked about yet. Let me know down below in the comments. Super chats will be opened when this premieres. I will put that in the description so you guys can check that out. And until next time, guys, let me know what your thoughts are. Comment below. Live chat during the premiere. Like I said, what super chats are open or will be open. Description will let you know that. Also, check me out at patreon.com. Check me out at my Teespring store. I have a new item up celebrating 15 years here on YouTube. Check that out, if you will. And also check out BW Rose's Discussions podcast for all your audio podcasts, or at all your favorite audio podcast locations. But more specifically, check out BW Rose's Discussions podcast at Spotify. The more you check me out at Spotify, the more it gets me closer to 100 followers to unlock the ambassador ads. But until next time, guys, I'll talk to y'all later.